Back in January, I made a video about how the perception system in Pantheon Rise of the Fallen, the upcoming MMORPG by Visionary Realms, was evolving. The key takeaways were that perception had now been connected to adventuring through the ability to discern enemy traits and dispositions. VR said that a keeper, a player who has developed their perception skills to a high level, will be able to identify these for their allies. They also said this was just scratching the surface of what they envision a keeper being able to do, and it appears they're forging ahead on this front. In the May 2022 Developer Roundtable, Adam Tejon-Mostel, production manager for Visionary Realms, talked at length about where perception is now as a game system. The governing design has now been ratified, and it's awaiting programming resources for implementation. What is this design? Well, it was summarized when Tejon said, "There will be certain aspects of itemization and gameplay that, while not strictly progression-based, will only be accessible by being a keeper yourself or by engaging with the keeper who can help you access those things." It's important to note that Tejon defined progression strictly in terms of gaining experience, rather than itemization or skill increases for your character. It's also important to say that Tejon was clear that implementation problems could cause this design to change. But let's unpack what he said a little more, because I know there are some phrases in there that might raise questions or concerns. Let's start with itemization. We all know how important loot is in an MMO. It's what we seek, what drives us to pillage entire bandit camps, and what keeps us killing those placeholders until we get the mob that has the one thing to rule them all. So, to hear the word itemization connected to a system that not everyone will want to partake in may be anxiety-inducing to some. Tejon addressed these concerns, however. He compared the keeper in Pantheon to the role of a crafter. In almost every MMO ever made, it's common that there are items only attainable through the crafting process. If I'm not a crafter, I bring the materials to one, and I pay for their crafting services. I don't have to be a crafter, but the item is still available to me. In Pantheon, he said they want to see adventurers bring keepers to places where their services may be needed. One of the services will be spawning NPCs or rare bosses that might have their own itemization. So whatever that item is, the non-keeper can still attain it. In fact, if the time and effort to become a keeper with this ability is so great, it's likely they will not be skilled enough in adventuring to attain it on their own either. So it's a symbiotic relationship. And that really leans into Pantheon being a social, group-centric MMO. But it's not just being loot spawners, as there are other services a keeper may offer. The other word Tejon used was gameplay. It was later said that keepers can assist in accessing hidden passages that allow players to engage with additional lore, or even things that act as shortcuts to go from one part of the dungeon to another. Of course, there's some overlap between these two areas, as getting to certain places will certainly lead to noteworthy loot. What I hear though is, again, not a means of limiting access, but rather expediting it. In the same vein as a player who doesn't want to partake in crafting, some players just want to get to the boss via the path of least resistance. A keeper may be able to save the non-keeper a whole bunch of time and energy by accessing a hidden path through Halner Cave, and in a game like Pantheon, where challenge is something the devs take very seriously, that may be an incredibly valuable thing. And no, of course I didn't overlook what was said about a keeper granting access to additional lore. I mean, that is the real loot we're here for, right? Okay, well, maybe that's just me, but in all seriousness, this is interesting because it's basically what perception was in its initial stages, that being a cascading lore revealing system that rewards those interested in the details with more details. And I feel like this now fits well into perception as part of a more robust system that's been supplemented rather than redesigned. As Tejon said, barring any implementation issues, perception is about certain aspects of content that can only be accessed if you have a keeper with the appropriate skills, flags, or all other components that go into the perception system who can facilitate that access. Lastly, Tejon suggested some tertiary things a keeper may provide to the group, such as being able to visualize enemy footprints, detect treasure chests, activate special devices in the world, even reveal seemingly normal enemies to be hidden named ones. It sounds like these items are a little lower on the to-do list right now, but it also serves to illuminate how VR is viewing a keeper's function in Pantheon. There was another piece of completely new information about the perception system revealed, and that was that the keeper abilities may fall within the limited action set constraints. Tehom said that they want to give keepers access to abilities that will actually compete for space on the LAS. Up until now, what we've known about the perception system is that there are two skills associated with it: Insight and Investigate. What has been previously stated is that Insight is a passive skill, while Investigate is an active skill. But it sounds like VR has some more abilities in the works, as Tehom commented they want to provide abilities that will help groups assess and navigate their environments and encounters. What's also newsworthy is that unlike the LAS, where you can alter your action bar when out of combat, it sounds like the keeper abilities will be less interchangeable. Tehom said, the current thinking is, unlike your combat loadout, these choices will need to be made at dedicated locations, so you're actually making a commitment to the role you are undertaking. What these dedicated locations are remains unknown, but this makes your role as a keeper very mission specific. Whether this is good or bad, I think, depends on other design choices like how many keeper abilities exist in total, how the content is designed to utilize them, and what class abilities and techniques are you being asked to forgo. And on that note, VR said being a keeper will be a decision with a cost, both individually and for the group in which they are included. Tehom used the example of less combat optimization or flexibility. On the group side of things, this seems like a given. Having a keeper take a spot in the group means less combat tools available, and on the whole, weakens your group. You're sacrificing something, whether it's damage output or absorption, healing capacity, or even crowd control. Think of it like the trembling, frail historian on your expedition that needs to be protected by mercenaries at all times. They're a liability in any encounter, but they also allow the group to bypass even more difficult encounters, exploit weaknesses in the enemy, or use the environment to their advantage. But maybe it doesn't have to be an all or nothing situation. I'd imagine that a keeper may choose to spend some time developing their class abilities in lieu of some higher level keeper abilities, and therefore there becomes some sort of hybrid like a warrior historian or a battle mage academic perhaps. Again, it puts the keeper-adventurer relationship in a place where there's a give and take between the two roles. Now, from an individual standpoint though, what is the cost of being a keeper? Choosing to put keeper abilities on your action bar means you're much more specialized, at least until you can alter your action bar. But the bigger picture is development of keeper abilities being a choice. And here's where we still don't really know much about how the system works, although we did get a little insight into what the process is. When asked if exploration provides tangible benefits, Tehom did say they'll be offering some passive perception experience gains as a reward for exploration. That sounds pretty simple, right? You explore new places, you progress as a keeper. That's really all we know at this point when it comes to actual progression of keeper abilities. To me, that seems a bit too simple and something almost everyone is going to be doing anyway. The key here, at least in my analysis, is making the path to becoming a keeper rigorous enough to warrant foregoing other systems, much like how choosing your class forgoes another, at least in the medium term. My hope is that we see this become more in-depth going forward. On that front, when asked if perception will impact class abilities, Tehom pumped the brakes a little, acknowledging that doing so would run the very real risk of changing perception from a system that's considered optional to one that's seen as compulsory. He said, we need to be really careful with how much perception is interfacing with combat, and added that they're okay with perception being an amplifier, but directly influencing something like stats or potency will move the needle from opt-in to being viewed as necessary. To go back to the crafter parallel, if developing your blacksmithing skill increased your strength statistic, and assuming strength affected damage output, being a blacksmith would be expected from damage-dealing classes. And here's the key quote, which I think perfectly encapsulates VR's intent with the perception system. We don't want perception and adventuring to be about how players perform against content, rather about how they experience and relate to content. Pantheon is a game of player versus environment in almost every way, so it's not about whether being a keeper makes you better or worse against that environment, it's about allowing multiple approaches to the same challenge, or in other words, player agency. And when that involves social gameplay, I think that's what those following Pantheon are interested in. just how interested are people in being a keeper anyway? Well, after this roundtable aired, we here at Pantheon Plus put up a Twitter poll asking that very question. Over 77% of the 135 of you that voted said they were going to be a keeper. And as for the 22% who weren't, don't worry, the Keepers Union will keep you well informed of the world around you. But I am curious, having now heard my breakdown and analysis of VR's design for keepers, does this make you more or less interested? What are your thoughts on where the perception system is headed? Let me know in the comments. Of all Pantheon's features, perception is at the top of my list when it comes to personal interest, so I hope my enthusiasm comes across in this video. There was more said about storylines and how they're being developed, which is basically Pantheon's questing system, that I didn't go into here, so stay tuned for that in an upcoming video. And if you enjoy this content, here are some similar videos you may also enjoy. And you can check us out streaming every Tuesday night, 9 o'clock Eastern, on our show MMOs 101 on our Twitch channel, linked in the description. I hope to see you there, and until next time, cheers, and thanks for watching.